Welcome, everybody. This is today our last session talking about people, relationships, and DMM, the dynamics of how we relate to one another and to lost people, how that affects our disciple making. And so today I have asked Brent, Jim, and Grace to all share some of their perspective. And, really, I could have asked any of you to share. Would love to have that opportunity, but to share your perspective of what you've learned about relationships and interacting with people along your journey in disciple making. One thing that I will reiterate today, in this time of walking out these principles of raising the sails, I have seen how the Lord is requiring of me greater engagement with people, more relationships, stronger relationships, more authentic relationships. And the way we relate to one another in the disciple making is different than what we have learned in our traditional churches. And so I hope that you are learning these things and the Lord's teaching you about that. But I'm very excited today. We're going to start with Brent. And then after Brent, we're going to go to Grace, and then we're going to go to Jim. And so Brent, when you finish, Grace, you just take over and we'll do it that way. And really appreciate y'all ministering to us or sharing with us today.
Awesome. Hey, first off, hasn't Susie done an amazing job with this relationship series? It's been really good. We're grateful for you, Susie, and your heart and passion. I look around these windows and I look at just the relationships that we have. Some of us have only met virtually through this call, but some of us, we've gotten to hang out like at the last gathering in the beautiful Lubbock, Texas. And one of the things I've recognized is, man, the depth of the relationships that God's provided us in the disciple making community is a gift from God. And when Susie said, hey, could you just share for a few minutes about relationships and what God has done? I've been on this journey since the very end of 2019, went all in 2020, and have been just learning through this process that unity is probably more important than we all realize. God really deeply values unity. And in order for us to be unified, we have to be willing to collaborate. And I think a word that's become very important to me is when we say collaborate, I mean that we are literally co-equals.
Yeah.
Like we look at one another as equals, side by side, disciples making disciples. And I think that's rare in the context of the North American church that we've grown up in. There's a lot of positioning. And these are things that God's just been working on my heart a lot since the end of 2009. And I was talking to Joe just this week about this, and we were just talking about how this whole journey has been like God peeling our onion. And it's like one layer at a time. And just when you think God's peeled that layer off of you, then you realize how prideful you are, and he peels another layer off of you. And then just when you think that layer is off, you realize how sinful you are in relationships, and he peels another layer off of you. And it's like layer after layer after layer. And I think that why Jesus said that we had to die to ourselves daily is because this is not easy in the relationships that we are a part of, to die to yourself and to see somebody as an equal. And the verse I wanted to share real quick was just Luke 9:23 and 24. Jesus said to the crowd, if any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way. This is the New Living Translation. Give up your own way. Take up your cross daily. And I think the reason God says daily is because of this. You peel one layer of your selfishness back, and then God's like, okay, now that we've dealt with that layer, let's get to the deeper stuff. Let's get to the next layer and peel that back. So if you want to be my follower, you must give up your own way, take up your cross daily, and follow me. Another translation of that same verse says, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. And so I think this idea of dying to ourselves is so big. And one thing that I'm just growing to love and enjoy in this journey is the co-equal part, the collaboration part. Praying with other disciple makers in our Pacific Northwest area, being a part of other people's prayer gatherings when they're going out among the lost, going with them. And then as you begin to, come alongside other people as a co-equal, you realize it starts to bring this like reciprocation. And, even this week, Brad's on this call, we got to do training together and collaborate together with a church group. And then we went out among the lost, and most of these people, it was their first time to ever go, but he needed more people who had experience of going out and having spiritual conversations with lost people. And so we co-labored together, and we just feel like God's doing some extraordinary things. And I think when he sees us working together in unity, it moves God's heart and he blesses. And so the last thing that I wanted to share is, I think, incredibly challenging, but I don't think we can have unity, and I don't think you can have collaboration unless we take this very seriously. And I'm pretty passionate about this. I think we need to regularly be assessing whether we have any remnants left in our life of building our own castle within the kingdom. I think we regularly need to assess in our own lives whether we have any remnants left of that selfishness of building our own castle, our own thing, our own marketing, our own way. Is there any remnants of that left? Are we trying to build our own castle within the kingdom, or are we just trying to build the kingdom? And this is the biggest piece of the peeling of the onion that God's done in my life. And I would just encourage you, if Jesus said that we need to daily take up our cross, why is that? Because I think some of those things seep back in, those remnants come back. And I just want to ask of all of you, as we kind of process this today and wrap up this relationship series, I just want to ask you that question, that you would take a little bit of time today or block out some time this week and just get alone with the Lord and say, hey, are there any remnants left in my life of me building my own thing, building my own castle within the kingdom? And I think that if we will apply what Jesus was saying in Luke 9:23 and 24 to this concept, it gets to the root of why it's difficult for sometimes us to have that heart of unity and collaboration. Because when we're building our own castle, it's very, very difficult to be a co-equal with the disciple makers in our cities and in our regions around us. So Susie, that's what God put on my heart to share, and hopefully that helps somebody else, because I have grown in this and I'm still growing in it, and God's still peeling my onion.
Thank you. Thank you. We could just talk about that a lot, but we're going to move on to Grace.
I only have about 10 questions for you, Brent. I'd almost prefer, like Paul was saying, to give up my own space, and so that you could talk to us more about that. Well, Susie asked me to share a couple things. We had a great conversation a couple weeks ago, and I was, and so I'm going to share something about how God's been changing me, and then I'm going to share a story of my first Discovery Bible study with a family. Yeah, I'm so humbled by it and so awed. Okay, so let me start with the hard stuff first. So in January, I've got my journal here, so you can tell me I'm not making this up. On January 8th, I had come out of a difficult week at work, and there were some relational challenges with some of my coworkers. I'm in a strange kind of situation because we own the company, yet at the same time, I'm not the one that's operationally running and spearheading everything. And so people tend to, I'm very task oriented when I'm in there, because I've got a lot to do and a lot of things that I carry, but I only work part-time. And so people are intimidated by me. They don't think I'm approachable. There's all kinds of things. And so, and one of them had come to a head that week. And so I sat down with the Lord and I said, you know what? I just don't want anything to come between my witness and being someone who gives you glory and being a good disciple. I don't want anything relationally to come between that. Like, I'm willing for you to do whatever it's going to take to get these things out of my life that are offensive, to people. And right as soon as I said that word, the verse came to mind from Psalm 139. Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts, and see if there is any offensive way in me. And I prayed that, and I said, obviously, Lord, there's some kind of offensive way that I am with people at work. And I really want to know what it is. And I want to submit myself to you to have you change me who I am as a person. So I don't want anything to inhibit your gospel going forward. So the next morning, usually God doesn't answer this quickly, but the next morning I'm getting my cup of tea out of the microwave after heating it up, walking to my quiet room where I'm going to have my devotionals. And the Holy Spirit says to me, do you really want to know? And I said, yes, I really want to know. I really want to know what it is. And he said, okay, get ready. So I sat down, and the Lord revealed to me that there were two things that were hurting my relationships with others. One of them was selfishness, and the second one was superiority. And then I don't know if you've had that happen where you have the little movie vignettes that the Holy Spirit brings to your mind, like little instances where you've had conversations with people or situations just kind of start flashing through your mind. And one after the next, after the next, after the next of these situations came to mind. Here's where you were selfish in this situation. Here's where you were acting in a superior way to other people, which I think ties in with what Brent was saying. You have to be willing to be fully equal, with another. And so, it just kept coming up. And here is like, okay, here's where selfishness displays itself in your life. You interrupt people. You want to be the first in getting your stuff done before other people. You're impatient. You don't have considerations for what other people are going through, like something personal that they might have brought into work that you're not paying attention to because you're so driving your tasks to get done. And he listed then numbers of my staff that were going through very difficult times that I had just barreled over. And then, basically he was saying, you don't have room for the other person. For an awareness of the other person's need. And unless you do that, you're not going to build relationships. And then he got even deeper and he says, it also reveals itself in how you serve. Like you think you serve, but look at how you serve. Like, what am I really willing to be inconvenienced with? Like, I'll serve if it fits in my schedule, or I'll serve, or I'm willing to sacrifice to a point. But this was all he talked to me about in regards to selfishness. So then he switched topics and he says, okay, here's where superiority is a problem. He says, you think and act like you're better than everybody else, that you know more than everybody else, and that others are dumb, and that you're surprised actually when they take initiative or think that your ideas are better than theirs, or that only you can solve things. You come off as a know-it-all, and that is the opposite of meekness. I was like, okay, I'm listening, but are you done? And I'm like, so he's like, well, wait a minute. What do I do about this? I'm like, thanks for revealing it to me, but now what do I do with that? And he's like, okay, over this next year, I want you to focus on two things: silence, like learn to listen, like Susie talked about last week, and prayer. That's it. That's what I want this year for you to be about, is silence and prayer. And, obviously it just, it hit me really hard. And I was kind of weeping while I'm journaling and on that, but, and I'm not sure I'm there yet. I'm still learning, but at least I'm quicker to recognize when selfishness or superiority kicks in and when I'm rubbing someone the wrong way at my work in regards to that. So that's part one. So then about 3 weeks ago, one of the guys in another training that I'm going through with Dr. Isla's group in Lifeway, I was just sharing with the group about how I've been praying and praying, and you all know I've been praying and praying for the Lord to give us a team to here that, you know, I feel like sometimes I'm by myself here in Waco and I'm just praying and praying for a team. And he said to me, he said, for about a year I did that and it was very fruitless. He said, then the Spirit said, why don't you start praying for someone that you can mentor or someone that you can disciple instead of praying for a team? Let's just start there. And I said, I'm going to take that to heart. And I did. I started praying for that. And the Lord brought 4 names to mind. And I started praying for those people and looking for an opportunity to start talking to them. So our church is doing this. We involve and we volunteer with a mobile food pantry. And the 3 churches in our area, we've been meeting as pastors for the last year on Zoom, getting to know each other. And we just started a combined food distribution in October. So we just started to work together in doing something together that's actually physically doing something ministry-wise together. So I've been inviting my congregation, because we do this twice a month, you know, hey, come and work, come and pack food. And it's only an hour and a half. And then we go out to lunch afterwards. We can have fellowship. I mean, pretty minimal commitment, pretty low barrier to entry to start serving. No one ever came. You know, I had a couple people from one of the other churches come. And then periodically a couple from my churches would come, but then not regularly. But just exposing people to that. And so I pull up in the parking lot and there's this new couple that started going to our church. And I asked them permission to be able to share this story today, because what's going on with them and what God's doing in their life is so sacred. It's so holy that I just didn't feel comfortable talking about them without their permission. But anyway, they came, and he's blind and she's half blind. And they're like, we're not sure if we can do this, but we wanted to try. And I'm like, you can do this. This is awesome. So I took his hand and I had him feel the surface we were going to be working on, showed him where we were going to be filling the groceries. Anyway, we had a wonderful hour and a half. We worked together and we went out to lunch together. And while we're at lunch, he says, is it okay if I ask you a question about the Bible? I said, sure. And he tells me this story about how they found this Bible and he's worried he might have stolen it. And is that okay? And I'm like, I think you're fine. I mean, the person's probably just glad you're reading the Bible. He goes, well, that's my second question. He goes, I want to read the Bible and I don't know where to start. So I'm sitting next to me, my friend's sitting next to me, Sherry, she's gone out to the park with me for 6 months. We've had conversations with people. We've shared stories of Jesus. And I said, well, would you be open to Sherry and I coming over to your house and showing you a simple way where you can start to learn about who God is for yourselves from the Bible? And they both at the same time leaned forward and said, would you? And I was just like, this catches your heart. So we finished the rest of lunch. We set up a time where we were going to go to their house. And they're like, well, we don't know how our daughter's going to receive this because she's 20, she's in school, but she's super shy. She regularly comes out of her room. And I think she'll be okay with you guys coming over for the Bible study, but, we're not really sure about it. I said, well, I think it'll be fine. If she doesn't come, that's fine, but go ahead and invite her to come if she wants to. So the next Tuesday comes and we go over to her, to the house. And we have the most amazing Discovery Bible study together. And the daughter comes. And now as she comes, she reads, she participates, she answers the question. She's like fully engaged. And afterwards, the wife says to me, you have no idea how you've just opened the whole world for me. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, I thought you were going to come and teach us for an hour, but you've come and you've taught us how to learn for ourselves. She said, I'm just so grateful for that. So then fast forward, yesterday we met again. Keep in mind, he's still blind and he wants to help out with maintenance at our church. So the Lord said, don't make fun of him, or don't, just put him aside. Think about what he might be able to do. And so I found a project for him to do, which required cutting wood and, screws and saws and all that stuff. And I was like, okay. And I gave him the project. And so yesterday before Bible study, we went around and said, what are you thankful for? And he says, well, I'm really thankful that I didn't hurt myself during this project. And he said, usually when I work on projects, I bleed somewhere. I'm going to cut myself or whatever, because I'm blind. And so I have to do everything by feel. And sometimes I don't get my finger out of the way. He says, but you know what happened? I said, what's that? He said, Jesus was with me working on that project. And I said, well, what do you mean? He goes, well, I felt Jesus standing behind me. And then I realized, hey, Jesus was a carpenter. He knows how to do this stuff. I'm just going to have Jesus help me with this project. He didn't cut himself. He didn't bleed. He got it all done. It was square. I looked at it. I'm like, the project's beautiful. And he says, but you know what happened after that? I said, what's that? He said, he says, I realized that Jesus wasn't just behind me, that Jesus was inside me. And he says, and I got all warm. And I just said, that's a beautiful testimony, John. Would you be willing to share that with the church on Sunday? I'll talk anywhere you want me to go. I'll share that testimony. So he's going to share that testimony about how God helped him with that project and how Jesus is living inside him. And and they told me that they said, you have no idea how our house has changed. We used to yell and scream and fight all the time, and now there's a peace in our home that I've never experienced. And you don't realize this, but all we do are talk about these stories. We Google stuff, we look them up, and we're just talking about these stories and telling these stories to each other all the time, practicing our stories. He says it's all we do. Thank you so much for caring for us. And so that's the end of my sharing time. Yeah. Thanks.
Wow, Grace, thank you. I feel like we need to worship God before we go into my next part. Just to thank God for Grace's story. That was inspiring. So can I pray here? Lord, thank you for our friend Grace. God, thank you for her obedience, her faithfulness, her persistence, and God, for what's going on in this family, and that God, you'd allow her to be a part of it and inspire all of us with what she just said. So we can't wait to hear the next chapter of this, but God, thank you. And we worship you. You're the God that's on the move. In Jesus' name, amen.
Just let me say one last thing. I feel like, why did it take, it's 2 years since I finished my training, just like right now is when we finished. And I just feel like finally, maybe I'm now a disciple worth reproducing. And that's why it's now. So hang in there, persevere, and let God keep changing you, because he's got good stuff planned. So Thanks, Jim.
Awesome. Well, you guys aren't in this room with me. There's a bunch of bugs flying around. So if there's something in my eye, that's why. Nothing to do with what Grace just said. Hey, as always, I'm going to be way less deep than Brent and Grace, but I'm going to share a couple quick thoughts, and even just this idea of relationships series. I was a youth pastor for 15 years. A relationship series meant, hey, 6 weeks on sex and dating, and the attendance went up. And this is a really different kind of series, and I'm really glad. Not as awkward, but way more helpful. So I want to share just 3 real practical things for me. And one of them comes from even Susie last week mentioned this book, Jesus Strategy, and she shared it with me a couple times before. And usually it takes 4 or 5 times to go, I need to go buy that. So started reading this last week. And one of the chapters, about halfway through it, and one of the chapters was just so interesting, talking about gospel presentations. And I've definitely shifted, like, from being someone of like, hey, here's how you walk through bridge illustration to follow Jesus, to much more storytelling and all that. But I never asked the question, like, really, why doesn't Jesus like just share a real simple presentation? Like, I noticed he doesn't do that at the end of the Sermon on the Mount. Why doesn't he go, okay, so if you're in with this, here's what you need to do. Pray this prayer with me. And this book talked about it a ton. Here's the reason why. It's because it's not relational. Like an altar call in a big giant building. I'm not saying God hasn't worked through those things, so don't hear on that. But it's not relational, right? It's like, well, good luck with that. Or even the idea of, hey, well, let me just walk you through really quick. You can do this and pray this prayer, and even if it's a one-on-one setting, we don't see Jesus doing that. And I think the reason why is it's not very relational. And he was so focused on relationships. Instead, it was, can I invite you to spend time with me, or spend time with God? And as you do that, you're going to fall in love with me, and that'll produce obedience and a life transformation. So for me, there's just been part of that would even just be some confession and conviction that oftentimes I think this, and I'm not saying God hasn't used that, but the quick gospel presentation is a shortcut that usually has us skip the relational piece, which I think is the whole thing, right? Is what we've been learning this past couple weeks. So that's one just real simple one that just even thinking about, hey, how do we? Jesus invited people to walk with him, not to simply agree with him on something. So that's one. A second thing, for us as a church, it's been a really significant season. We did a series a couple months back on, the different ways we can engage with DMM. And I was the guy that spoke on the transition one. And I even struggled with going, you can't call it transition, because transition means you're just going to move on to the next one. Like, that's the wrong word for it. No, it probably is, because I think it's pretty hard to sit in that of hey, how do we not go all the way? If you're at the transition lines, you could be different places, but for us, we've been in a transition period of everything we do is leveraged towards making disciples. But a while back, went on a prayer retreat, fasted for a bunch that week, and just going, God, what do we do here? And there was a lot of frustration of just going, a lot of people were living this out. But probably about half weren't really engaging, and it just killed culture. And I found even the people that were excited, others, and I felt like all I was doing was just convincing people, or I'd have to say, well, but if you're not into this. And so anyways, all that to say, we a while back said, I think we need to go relaunch and go all in with this. But then my wife and I started asking the question, well, how do we do that? And how do we convey that to our church? And so here's the relational piece for me. Is that we said, I think that means that and it depends on the size of your church, how you can do this. But for us, it was, we're going to have every single family over to our house individually for a meal and sit across the table from them and convey our love for them, and then walk through how we've arrived at where we're at, and have it be a discussion, and then share some of the values going forward as we move our church in January to meeting in our house and really inviting people to, this is what we're doing. You got to be in if you want to do it. And so those have been wonderful. So we've been having, for the last while, 2 to 3 families over our house for dinner a week. We were talking to our kids about Thanksgiving, and they said, can it just be our family for Thanksgiving? We're like, okay, yeah, we get it. We're on the home stretch. We've only got a couple more to go. We'll be done by the beginning of December. But here's some things that have come out of that. So as you're thinking about processing through a church, it's one thing to go, I'm going to get up and just convey to everybody we're going to do this, or we're going to have some group times at our church. And maybe you got to do that. It has been so powerful to speak just one-on-one with families. And here's 2 stories that came from it. So both the guys' names are Rob. One guy, Rob, been a part of our church for several years. His family's on our leadership board. I mean, his wife's been on staff. And they've just not fully grabbed onto the disciple making piece. They're just wonderful people, but have just struggled with that. And he was a former pastor in a Presbyterian church, and just kind of had ugly endings to the 2 churches that he led that were really difficult. And as they shared, hey, I don't think we're going to continue on with this journey come January. They said, we got to tell you though, just how you've dealt with this has been actually incredibly healing for us, because we've never stepped out of a church or seen something like this happen in a church and then not be ugly. And this just feels beautiful. And so in this season, we're actually, some people we're sending out, we're planting our 6th church, but legacy church, but we're sending that out. And then some are going to go some other directions. And then a lot are going to go with us with this. But so anyways, that's been a cool piece of it. They're not coming with us. And yet they've been like, we love this whole thing of what's happening. And then last night we had another family over, and the guy's name's Rob as well. And as we're sharing, I have 9 values, which is way too many, but just of kind of what this looks like for us going forward. And after every single point, he's just like, that's awesome. That's incredible. He just started sharing his story each time with like, oh my, I can't wait to be a part of this thing. Can January come sooner? And if this was in a big group, Rob wouldn't get to share that. But instead, my wife Rachel and I are just sitting there going, this is so cool. These people are man, they feel the same way. We've had a lot of those kind of things. So just a piece of just being relational, of thinking, what's the most relational way I convey how we're moving forward? And not even like we wanted to have meals at our church. We said we want them to be in our home. People have said, can we do a coffee? And we're like, can it be a meal? Like, we'd just love to sit down together in our house. So that's the second one. And then here's my third one. And I've shared a little bit of this before, but maybe asking the question, how do you stay relational with people when it doesn't seem like they're going to be part of your core? Like they're like a disciple maker with you, at least now, or they're not a person of peace. And we only have a certain amount of time. And 2 Timothy 2:2 says, right, and trust reliable people are going to pass on to others. So they don't fit that category. But you care about them and you don't want to like burn down bridges. And I just would say the resource for me that has been a game changer, and even this week, has been the prayer calendar. And anytime I take someone through the training, we changed a little bit on the week where we talk about prayer. We put the prayer calendar in there, and we've just found that's huge. Like people, oh, I'm really doing this. Like when they start, hey, you have to over the next 6 weeks do this prayer calendar thing. But so the moment that someone's in our training, I put them on my prayer calendar first, so they see like, oh, this is what it's like. Oh, wow, that was cool experiencing that. But then second, if they don't continue on, I still stay in relationship with them. And what I found over and over again is sometimes not the moment they go through training are they ready to jump in, but it's like a couple months later, because I've stayed in relationship with them and just having this rhythm in my life of praying for people and them seeing this, that they go, hey, I'm ready to roll. Whereas I'm just not organized enough to stay consistent with all these people and juggle it. But I put them on my prayer calendar and it stays relational. And that's true with persons of peace as well, right? We've probably had people you're like, this is a person of peace. Oh, dang it, they're not. And you're like, we're 8 or 9 stories in and they just drop it. And it's like, oh man. But I've just learned at that point, I put them on my prayer calendar. And so I've got a number of people that I thought were persons of peace that weren't, but I'm still in relationship with them. And it's not a time suck for me. They're just in the rhythm of I still talk to them. And I started a thing this last week where I'm doing a 3-week habit building thing with some people. Someone else took me through it, and where you write down a proverb that you're given in your own words. You copy it and then write it in your own words and do a couple other things. And it's really simple. It's like 10 minutes. Anyway, so I was like, I was then challenged to take some people through it as well. And I'm like, I'm going to call my group Former Persons of Peace. And so I reached out to these guys who are in my prayer calendar, and I'm still in communication with them, even though they've dropped it. And I've got 6 guys that are all not Christians that are still in relationship with me, just weren't there yet at that point to really go for it. And they've all signed up and said, we're doing this. And so they each day we actually post a picture of what we wrote, post a picture of part of it is you have to go outside and meditate or pray, whatever word they want to use. And so I'm still in life with these guys, and it's not a thing where it's like a crazy busy thing. And I found God resurrects persons of peace as well. And I've seen that a number of times where they go, I'm ready now, and they weren't before. So those are some practical things for me. Here's a quote from a book that's been really challenging for me too. It says this: if we desire to fulfill the Great Commission, we will turn our churches into high joy environments. This is a community where our faces light up when we see each other. So just this, I get to be the guy that closes this relational series before we break into groups. I think this is a really, really big deal. When Jesus says they'll know your disciples by your love for one another, like that's really serious. How do we make it where people are excited to be? This is the highlight of their week, kind of like what Grace just said of, man, this is what we do. We can't wait to come together. And so anyways, those are a couple of practical thoughts from me. And hey, let's break into groups and discuss this and discuss our normal questions. And I can't wait for all of you. There's no excuses to come to San Diego in April. And I hope you stay for the push week too. Hey, let's go into groups.